All right, this is video 2 for lesson 11. We're going to keep going on with the activities of the small intestine. One is food breakdown and absorption. Most of your nutrients are actually absorbed in the small intestine, and a lot of the protein and carbohydrate digestion has been done, but fat hasn't really been broken down yet. So some things in the small intestine that help with food breakdown is brush border enzymes. These help to break down simple sugars and complete your protein digestion, and they're released from those little microvilli that are found in the small intestine. And then, believe it or not, most of the digestive enzymes that are found in the small intestine are released from the pancreas in what we call pancreatic juice. And this is released a lot due to hormonal stimuli. So you actually release those two hormones that help to stimulate the pancreas into releasing this pancreatic juice. And pancreatic juice is really responsible for your fat digestion. It also carries out protein digestion, completes the digestion of starch, and helps to break down nucleic acids. So the pancreas is a super important organ for breaking down food, and it's really the only organ that secretes enzymes to break down all different food groups. So this is just a picture kind of showing where this pancreas is. So your pancreas is this cool looking organ here. Okay, it's got endocrine and exocrine functions. We're talking about exocrine functions here. And it releases juice into this top part of the small intestine that really helps break down all the food groups. And remember that it's stimulated by the release of different hormones. So a lot of our food is absorbed here through active transport, meaning that it's using ATP. So the food actually enters into capillary beds in the little villi and then goes into the blood and then to the liver to be filtered, because the liver is your main organ that helps kind of filter the blood and make sure we don't have anything bad trying to enter into our main bloodstream. Lipids and fats don't do this. They're actually absorbed by passive transport because they're able to go right through that lipid bilayer. So it's a little easier for us to absorb fats. And also food propulsion is going on here. Remember, we have peristalsis and the segmentation that's really working that chyme and that food stuff through the small intestine so that we can absorb it into those capillary beds. All right, so now we're moving on to the large intestine. The large intestine is really important for some major reasons. We do some absorption in here as well. So by the time food enters into the large intestines, you're not really left with much. All the nutrients have been absorbed in the small intestine. Food residue spends approximately 12 to 24 hours in your large intestines. We don't have any enzymes in the large intestines, but we do have bacteria that actually hang out and metabolize whatever is left over. And what they are metabolizing is anything that you haven't absorbed in the small intestine. And when they metabolize it, the byproduct is gas. And that's what actually makes your fart smell is this bacteria metabolizing different nutrients, which is kind of gross to think about, but that's what actually smells when you pass gas is this bacteria. So bacteria is really important for producing gas and metabolizing nutrients, but to us, we're kind of like, whatever, we're just letting bacteria live in there and do that. So what does bacteria do for us? They actually help make vitamins. They help us make vitamins K and B, and we absorb those vitamins into the large intestine. This is where we also absorb water. We absorb water in the large intestine, and that's why if you have some sort of intestinal issue wrong and you're just going to the bathroom and it's liquid, we've all been there, that means you're not absorbing any water, which can be really dangerous, and you can get really dehydrated when you have really bad diarrhea for a long period of time. And this is why, because you're really not absorbing any water at all. Once the water has been absorbed, whatever we're left with is feces, and this is our undigestible food products that are now going to go to the rectum, and we're going to expel it from the body. So pretty much it's going to be mucus, bacteria, a little of water, and anything that we cannot digest. So how do we get rid of this stuff? Well, propulsion and defecation is extremely important. And how we move stuff through the large intestine is really interesting because, as you remember, the large intestine literally kind of defies gravity, and you have that ascending colon. So we have to go through these kind of contractions to move the food along. So haustral contractions and mass movements are the two types of contractions in the large intestines. And the haustral contractions happen about every 30 minutes or so. Basically, you're moving one food stuff from one haustra to the next haustra, where those kind of bulby sections in each of the large intestines. And this helps mixes the contents and helps you absorb your water. And then a couple of times a day, you have what are called mass movements, which are long and slow moving contractions, but they're very powerful and they can move that food stuff over large areas of the colon. And then we finally reach our defecation. So once the feces kind of hits the sigmoid colon and hits certain sphincters, it allows it to relax. And we have two sphincters. The first one is voluntary and the second one the first one is involuntary and the second one is voluntary. And it's really important that your external one is voluntary because that's what's kind of sending that message to the brain of, okay, I need to go to the bathroom, and you can make it to the bathroom before you just defecate. So it's super important that the external voluntary sphincter or external sphincter is voluntary, and then your internal anal sphincter is not voluntary. It kind of just opens up as the feces hits it. And the last topic we're going to talk about is metabolism pretty quickly. So what do we actually, use these ingredients for? Why do we need to absorb carbohydrates and fats, etc.? So metabolism is your broad term referring to all the chemical reactions occurring in your body. You have catabolism and anabolism. So catabolism is when you're actually breaking stuff down. So this would be what we're really doing in like the stomach and small intestine, for example. We're literally breaking down very large items into smaller items so that way we can absorb them in the small intestine. And then anabolism is when we're going to be building them back up. So once we absorb a bunch of these like amino acids, for example, we can then take those amino acids and build them into the proteins that we need to use in the body. So basically what we do is when we're eating and digesting, we're breaking stuff down, and then the rest of our body can put it back together into what we need to use for life. So carbohydrates are your preferred fuel to produce ATP energy. You burn through your carbohydrate stash first in the form of glucose. Glucose is stored in your skeletal muscle and your liver as glycogen. And it's really important for cellular respiration. We literally take glucose and go through glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the ETC to create ATP molecules. And as you know, we need ATP energy to do everything. I mean, from muscle contraction to breathing to you even just taking notes right now, you have to have ATP energy. So here's our cellular respiration. We take glucose and oxygen, and through a very complex series of reactions, we come out with carbon dioxide. That's why you breathe out carbon dioxide, because that's our waste product, water, and ATP energy. So glycolysis is taking place in the cytoplasm of the cell. It splits glucose into what we call 2-pyruvate molecules, and what you create here is ATP, pyruvate, and NADH molecules. Then you go into the Krebs cycle. That pyruvate enters into the Krebs cycle, and this is where you produce a lot of your carbon dioxide and just a few ATP. And this and the electron transport chain take place now in the mitochondria. And then the electron transport chain is where you create most of your ATP. So these NADH molecules, you make them all through glycolysis and the Krebs cycle. And these molecules have a lot of energy stored from electrons, and we use those electrons here in the electron transport chain to actually create the ATP. So here's our glycolysis. we produce just a little bit of ATP and pyruvate. Then we get into the Krebs cycle, and it always has these smokestacks here because that's where you're releasing a bunch of your carbon dioxide. Then you have your electron transport chain, where we've now basically harvested a bunch of electron energy in here, and this is where we make a majority of our ATP. All right, fat metabolism. The liver handles most lipid metabolism. The liver uses fat to make ATP for its own use, and fat is kind of like our second store for energy. We store energy as fat. We make phospholipids out of it. We make cholesterol out of it. It's really important to make steroid hormones. We use it to make myelin sheath that wraps around the neurons. So we use it for many different reasons. We can use it for energy when carbohydrate stores are low, and then we can also use it to make just a ton of different items for our body to use. Protein metabolism. Protein is our last source of energy. This is when you're in starvation mode. You do not want to use proteins unless you are completely out of fat and carbohydrate stores, which shouldn't happen. So proteins make a lot of our cellular structures. Remember, we are proteins. It makes everything from keratin, which is made of your hair and your skin. We have a lot of connective tissue fibers like collagen. It can also make up different hormones. Those are all proteins. So proteins are very important in making sure that we are actually using them for cellular structures and not energy. When you start degrading proteins as fuel, you're in trouble. So liver functions and metabolism. So liver cells are going to detoxify drugs and alcohol. They degrade hormones, and they make cholesterol and blood proteins. This is the liver is super cool because it's one of the only organs that if it's really damaged, a part of it can actually be removed and it can still function really properly. And remember that nutrient-rich blood is actually brought directly to the liver so that the liver can basically filter it and make sure that there's nothing bad in there. The liver is also really important for maintaining blood sugar. So if you have very low blood sugar, it stores glycogen, and glycogenesis is the breakdown of genesis means to form, is glycogen formation that takes place mostly in the liver. So you store glucose here. And then glycogenolysis is the breakdown of that glycogen into glucose when you have low blood sugar. Gluconeogenesis is the making of glucose from non-carbohydrate structures like fats and proteins. So this is when, once again, you are really, really low on energy. We can actually take these and make glucose out of them. So glucogenesis is actually making glycogen when you have tons and tons and tons and tons of glucose. Glycogen is literally just glucose molecule attached to glucose, attached to glucose, attached to glucose. And then when we have low blood sugar, we can actually break down the glycogen and put it into the blood. Okay, and you've seen this picture before in the endocrine system. So if we have very low blood sugar, we can actually release glycogen, break it down into and make sure that we're releasing it into the bloodstream. Very cool. Cholesterol is also made in the liver, and it's used for steroid hormones and cell membranes. Now there's two types of cholesterol. So we have LDL and HDLs. And HDLs are good cholesterol because they can be broken down and eventually eliminated from the body, or we can use it for the body. And then LDLs are ones that are deposited inside of the arterial walls and can cause heart disease. So when you always hear the difference between good and bad cholesterol, that's what we mean. One is good, we use it for cell structures and we can break it down and eliminate it from the body if we have too much. And then our LDLs are the ones that can cause heart disease. All right, that is it. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and make sure you watch it again if you missed anything in your note guides.